The story of Nightmare Busters is a series of misfortunes, a long and winding journey marked by unfair setbacks, reflecting both bad luck and the unwavering determination of its creators. Originally designed in the mid-90s for the Super NES, the game suffered from poor timing. The release of a new generation of consoles scared off its potential publisher, Nichibutsu, leaving the project in limbo for nearly 2 decades. The game's revival in 2013, thanks to the efforts of the Super Fighter team, now seems like a fitting tribute to this work. Unfortunately, the curse did not end in 2013, as we will see at the end of this review. Nightmare Busters is an anomaly in more ways than one. The first is perhaps its stunning beauty. Developed quite late in the life of the console, Nightmare Busters easily stands alongside the most beautiful productions on the Super NES, such as Rendering Ranger and Demon's Crest. French artist Jean-Christophe Alessandri, who is also behind the visually striking Prehistoric Man, outdid himself here by creating a dark, almost dark fantasy atmosphere inspired by Irish folklore. With his finest pixel art, he delivered gorgeous graphic compositions, skillfully playing with contrasts, shadows, and gradients, as seen in the scenes set in a burning barn or a dense forest. The sprites, which are as detailed as the backgrounds, are also impressive in their size and the number of animation frames, starting with the main character himself. Another anomaly. How can a game with such large sprites and detailed environments run so smoothly, with hardly any slowdown? It took me several hours of gameplay to notice any lag, particularly in a cave sequence. Even more remarkable, the game does not slow down much in cooperative mode. This is a real feat thanks to the lead programmer, the late Christophe Guiraud. Yes, in addition to its beauty, Nightmare Busters is also remarkably playable. It features responsive, precise, and fast controls, putting the player in the ideal position to succeed. While the game's notorious difficulty is well earned, you can be sure that mastering your character will never be in question. Arcade Zone's title is an action platformer with a run-and-gun style, following in the footsteps of Data East's Spin Master and Capcom's Midnight Wanderers, from which it draws its primary inspiration. The game provides the player with a full range of moves to progress: sliding, multi-directional shooting, dashing, and special attacks, with the latter 2 being limited in number. Additionally, there is a wide variety of shots, differing in power, firing rate, and range. At first, I found the absence of diagonal shooting regrettable, but over time, it becomes clear that it would be unnecessary. Like in Ghouls and Ghosts, this setup fits the level design and enemy placement perfectly. One aspect where the game's arcade inspiration clearly shows is in the omnipresence and aggressiveness of the NPCs. Quick and relentless, they often attack in groups, leaving you little time to catch your breath. This makes Nightmare Busters a very intense experience, requiring constant attention to avoid being overwhelmed. Unfortunately, the lack of a gradual difficulty curve discouraged many players. For instance, Stage 1 is one of the most challenging levels in the game, while later stages tend to be more manageable. However, one constant remains throughout the game: the need to memorize every part, like the particularly tricky sequence in the castle. The level design is relatively straightforward but demanding, combining intense shooting sequences with platforming that often requires very precise timing and pixel-perfect positioning. There's also a conventional boss rush, which does feel a bit like filler content. Speaking of bosses, they are solidly rooted in classic design. Most have readable patterns that rarely catch the player off guard, but a few will definitely put up a tough fight. Thankfully, after a tough start, the game's charm begins to work its magic. Fast-paced and highly satisfying, the gameplay hooks you in, making it hard to put down. The firepower of some of your weapons, especially the best one, the double shuriken, is particularly thrilling. This is helped admittedly by the quality of the sound effects, which effectively amplify the feeling of power. However, the soundtrack is undoubtedly the weak point of Nightmare Busters. Some of the music feels uninspired, with short loops and lazy melodies. But to its credit, it fits the game's dark atmosphere well. The developers have been quite open about it. Nightmare Busters is heavily inspired by Midnight Wanderers, one of the 3 games in Capcom's 3 Wonders compilation. There are so many similarities that it would be too long to list them all. The characters, of course, the universe without a doubt, but also certain levels, like the forest stage, a very similar shooting system, some animations, and even a few bosses. And yet, believe me, this game has nothing to envy from its muse. Having played both, I can confidently say that the student has surpassed the master. In terms of control responsiveness and precision, action intensity, and even gameplay, Nightmare Busters comes out on top. Only the enchanting graphics of the Capcom title, which admittedly benefit from a higher resolution, and the character design might give me pause. Unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, the curse of Nightmare Busters did not end in 2013. The game is plagued by several critical bugs that make progress outright impossible under certain conditions. Here are the 3 bugs I encountered most frequently. First, in the cliff stage, failing to pick up an item after shooting its box causes the game to freeze. The same thing happens in the flying ship stage. More concerning is the bug in the cave, where a simple special attack also freezes the game. How can we explain the lack of information on these issues, with only a few exceptions? And more troubling, how can the publisher justify such a failure to adhere to even the most basic debugging guidelines? It's a real shame that might not affect everyone, but it does somewhat tarnish the game's overall excellence. Thankfully, Upal Silandre managed to patch the game, delivering what can be considered the true final version of the title. Regardless, Nightmare Busters was, for me, a delightful surprise. Having discovered it later on, I found myself with a game that I'm tempted to place among the best in its genre on the NES. Honestly, aside from the bugs and the unbalanced difficulty, I find no serious flaws. It is not just a superb homage to Midnight Wanderers. It surpasses it, plain and simple.